All right, welcome to this explainer. Today we're doing something a little bit different. We are literally stepping into the vault. We're tossing aside all the rumors, the hearsay, and we're looking directly at the unprecedented scale of the U.S. War Department's newly unsealed historical and modern archives. We are talking about tens of millions of pages, decades of buried secrets, and this massive, overarching administrative effort to finally shed some light on unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAPs.
Just listen to this. The pilots and I were virtually speechless after these observations. That is a stunning first-hand account, and it's pulled straight from these newly released files. It was written by a currently serving senior U.S. intelligence officer, and they're describing a genuinely harrowing encounter aboard a military helicopter over a mountain test range back in 2025. This isn't some Hollywood sci-fi script. This is a declassified official government report.
And honestly, the public's appetite for these reports is absolutely staggering. Just weeks after it launched on May 8, 2026, the government's brand new portal for these documents, war.gov/UFO, received over 1 billion hits worldwide. Just let that sink in for a second, 1 billion hits. The global fascination with this topic is reaching heights we've literally never seen before, all because those vault doors are finally swinging open. So how do you even begin to process that kind of volume? Well, the government established the PERS-U framework. Directed by the president and overseen by Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, this interagency team was basically built to hunt down, review, and publicly release these unresolved UAP records. Secretary Hegseth has framed this whole thing as a historic transparency effort. The goal? Releasing files to the public that simply lack any definitive explanation.
Okay, let's dive into this. Because to truly grasp the modern encounters, we absolutely have to look at the foundation. As we funnel down from that massive website and its billion hits, we land on a dusty, incredibly sensitive series of historical documents. It's known as the Sandia Base Dossier.
Released in the massive May 22nd tranche under file DOW-UAP D017, this 116-page dossier outlines sustained aerial incursions over Sandia Base down in New Mexico, spanning from 1948 to 1950. Now, you might be wondering, why does this specific base matter? Well, right after World War II, Sandia Base was an absolutely critical national security node. It was an assembly and storage site for the early U.S. nuclear stockpile. And during that incredibly tense 2-year period, military personnel documented 209 distinct sightings of unexplained phenomena. And these weren't just random sightings. They were directly over or immediately adjacent to this highly sensitive facility. Think about that. 209 incursions flying right over America's nuclear arsenal. And this brilliantly illustrates how the military attempted to make sense of the chaos. Air Force intelligence tried to methodically categorize these 209 bizarre anomalies into 3 distinct classes. First, you had the green fireballs. These were half-moon or discoid structures that traveled horizontally at extreme speeds. Next were the disks, flat, physical structures emitting this brilliant white light. And finally, meteors, objects displaying varied colors and more typical meteoric characteristics. They were desperately trying to apply some sort of scientific rigor to the completely inexplicable. The way the military escalated this is just fascinating. Following those initial 1948 sightings, they actually brought in Dr. Lincoln La Paz to conduct a formal scientific analysis in May of 1950. Literally the very next day, they launched Project Twinkle, which was this 24-hour observation network. Almost immediately, they intercepted 8 to 10 objects. Yet by August, so just a few months later, the FBI reported that despite all this high-level surveillance, Project Twinkle yielded absolutely 0 definitive answers. None. So, how did the experts at the time interpret this? Well, Dr. La Paz had a terrifying, completely earthly hypothesis. He warned that if these weren't our own highly classified domestic tests, they could actually represent advanced guided missiles launched all the way from the Soviet Union, capable of reaching New Mexico in under 15 minutes. It really highlights how, back then, these anomalies were primarily viewed through this terrifying lens of Cold War espionage and severe national vulnerability. Right, so we have the radar tracks, we have the high-altitude observations, but the files go much, much deeper than that. What happens when these objects actually come down to the ground? Let's pivot away from the sky for a second and look at a close encounter ground mystery pulled directly from that declassified Sandia Base dossier. This is known as the purplish glow physical disintegration case. Local police literally watched a 6-foot object descend into a nearby field. As they approached it, it emitted this strange purplish mist. And here's where it gets wild. When they tried to retrieve it, the object physically broke apart, rapidly disintegrated into an odorless residue, and then completely vanished within 25 minutes. And perhaps most bizarrely of all, the investigating officers noted that the object was so incredibly light, it didn't even bend the weeds or the grass it was resting on. Naturally, the baffled local police reached out to the nearby Air Force installation for help, but the military simply stated they had no record whatsoever of such a device and flatly denied any operational jurisdiction over the incident. It was a complete bureaucratic dead end. It left this stunning physical encounter officially unresolved and basically lost to history, at least until now. Okay, so we have this wild Cold War history, but the PureSuit initiative isn't just about blowing dust off of old, forgotten files. The second tranche of documents brings us right up to the present day. So the big question is, are these exact same anomalies still happening right now? Now, what's really interesting here is how this connects back to that quote from the beginning of our explainer. In late 2025, that senior intelligence officer and a helicopter crew observed a massive swarm of orange orbs. Two large oval orbs actually hovered stationary directly above the helicopter's rotor blades. Then, one of them closed to within 10 feet, physically split into two distinct bodies, and just accelerated away at an unimaginable speed. And just like those early 1948 Sandia Base incidents, the modern files reveal a persistent historical trend. Anomalous activity remains intensely concentrated around America's nuclear nodes. For example, enhanced radar logs from the Pantex plant, which is a vital facility for assembling U.S. nuclear warheads, documents structured objects traveling in tight formations right on the edge of restricted airspace. This nuclear connection is a thread spanning well over 70 years. And some of these sensor anomalies they're completely baffling. In one of the files, a federal agent shined a high-powered spotlight at an object out in the desert. But instead of reflecting off a solid surface or just piercing through the darkness, the beam abruptly terminated 50 yards away. It appeared to hit an invisible physical barrier. It's a hyper-localized sensor anomaly that completely defies our standard understanding of optical physics. So, with descriptions like splitting orbs, disintegrating metals, and invisible barriers, it is incredibly easy to jump to some pretty wild conclusions. But is this definitive proof of extraterrestrial life? To really look at the complete picture presented in the sources, we have to swing the pendulum back towards scientific skepticism. Because the official military review body, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, is completely unequivocal on this point. They explicitly state they have found no evidence suggesting any of these thousands of objects are extraterrestrial. They emphasize that a lot of these files lack a substantiated chain of custody, and that the vast majority of sightings can eventually be chalked up to camera artifacts, weather balloons, or optical illusions. Astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson really sums up the rigorous standard of proof demanded by the scientific community. As he puts it, in the history of science, the correct explanation has never been magic or aliens ever. The scientific method requires physical, undeniable, repeatable proof, not just compelling, unexplained telemetry or crazy eyewitness accounts.
And look, beyond the scientific skepticism, there's also some pretty intense political pushback going on. Several critics are arguing that the timing of these highly publicized UAP releases is actually a strategic geopolitical distraction. From their perspective, the entire PureSuit program, while claiming to be all about transparency, is viewed by certain lawmakers as an administrative smokescreen, something designed specifically to draw public attention away from much more pressing domestic and global crises.
But regardless of the skepticism and the political debates, the disclosure engine is still running at full speed. The Department of War is actively preparing a third tranche of files as we speak. There is intense congressional pressure right now, specifically a bipartisan demand for 46 highly classified UAP videos that were flagged by whistleblowers. And these are anticipated to include raw pilot voice transcripts and actual flight telemetry. The battle over national security versus public transparency is literally only heating up. Which brings us to the ultimate question. As the PureSuit vault opens even further and we try to navigate that gray area between rigorous scientific skepticism and these genuinely inexplicable military encounters, what else remains hidden in the upcoming releases? The data is finally out there, the files are being unsealed, and the mystery is now squarely in the hands of the public. Keep questioning, keep digging into the data, and thank you so much for joining me on this explainer.